They offered every Cuban citizen free internet. The government said no, and what the Cuban people did next changed everything and terrified their own government more than any military threat ever had. If you follow this story daily like we do, hit like right now, because what you're about to hear connects dots that most coverage completely misses. Cuba's government doesn't just restrict the internet, it owns it. Every single connection point on the island runs through ETECSA, the state telecommunications monopoly. There is no private provider. There is no alternative. Accessing the internet through any channel ETECSA doesn't control is a crime. That's not a policy. That's architecture, built deliberately, maintained aggressively, and defended at all costs. Freedom House's 2024 report confirmed what Cubans already knew. Authorities hold both the legal mandate and the technical capability to cut connectivity whenever they choose, and they have used it. During the nationwide protests in July 2021, mobile networks went dark. Not everywhere, selectively, surgically. The shutdowns targeted exactly the neighborhoods where demonstrations were spreading, exactly the moments when protesters were filming police violence and uploading it to the world. Junior Garcia, a Cuban podcaster who spoke to NPR, described what that silence felt like from the inside. It keeps us disconnected, uninformed, and unable to participate in peacefully solving Cuba's problems. He wasn't describing a technical failure. He was describing a system working exactly as designed. But here is where this story goes, somewhere most coverage never reaches. And stay with this, because the next part rewrites everything you thought you understood about Cuba's crisis. Before ETECSA expanded access, before any government relaxation, before any of the limited connectivity that exists today, Cuban citizens built their own internet. From nothing. They called it SNET, the street network. No government permission, no state infrastructure. Young, tech-savvy Cubans strung Ethernet cables between apartment windows, across rooftops, down alleyways, building by building, block by block across Havana. They hosted local servers in their bedrooms. They ran gaming tournaments, forums, chat services, film libraries loaded with American movies the state television would never broadcast. At its peak, SNET connected more than 10,000 users, all of it illegal, all of it thriving, all of it built by people who simply refused to accept that connection was a privilege the government could deny them. Subscribe now if you want to understand what's actually happening in Cuba, because we go deeper than the headlines every single day. The government watched SNET grow for years. When they finally moved against it, they didn't raid apartments. They didn't mass arrest operators. They did something more calculated and more chilling. They absorbed it. ETECSA migrated SNET's services into state infrastructure. The Union of Communist Youth took directional control. Access got funneled through supervised youth computer clubs where every user could be monitored. The creative, chaotic, ungovernable independence of SNET disappeared. What replaced it wore the same name but served an entirely different purpose. The network that citizens built to escape surveillance became a tool of surveillance. And yet, the impulse that built SNET didn't die with SNET. Freedom House's 2024 report documents what that impulse looks like today. Cubans use VPNs to reach blocked sites. They share foreign news through encrypted messaging apps. They load USB drives with downloaded content and pass them hand-to-hand through neighborhoods, the same way Soviet-era samizdat literature traveled through the USSR decades ago. The government cannot block fast enough. The underground moves faster than the law. This connects to something fundamental that most Cuba coverage completely misses. Washington has applied external pressure for decades. Blockades cutting fuel, sanctions squeezing the economy, ultimatums demanding political concessions. The regime has countered everyone. It survived the blockade through Venezuelan oil subsidies. It responded to ultimatums by releasing prisoners, just not the ones that mattered. Every external pressure produced an external countermove. Cuba has managed each one. Information is different. Information doesn't arrive through a port that can be blockaded. It doesn't require a tanker that can be turned back. It travels through cables strung between apartments by 20-year-olds who want to watch American films. It moves through USB drives exchanged in stairwells. It spreads through VPNs the government cannot shut down fast enough. And every piece of uncontrolled information that reaches a Cuban citizen chips away at the narrative the regime depends on to function. The offers of free internet weren't really about connectivity. They were about leverage. American infrastructure inside Cuban telecommunications would mean access the regime cannot selectively cut. That is why Havana refused. Not because it opposes the internet, because it opposes the internet it cannot control. But here is the paradox that the regime has no clean answer to. Cuba needs foreign currency. Tourism has collapsed. Venezuela's financial lifeline has thinned. Remittances from Cubans abroad increasingly flow through digital channels that require internet access. The regime needs connectivity to survive economically, and connectivity, even the controlled kind, steadily erodes the information monopoly it needs to survive politically. They are trying to thread a needle that gets smaller every year. Controlled access through ETECSA. Legal penalties for unauthorized use, selective shutdowns during politically sensitive moments. But the SNET story already proved what happens when people want connection badly enough. The government absorbed one network. It cannot absorb the impulse that built it. And 10,000 users in Havana was the number in 2014. The impulse has not shrunk. It has gone deeper underground and it has kept moving. China built the Great Firewall. Russia tightened controls after social media fueled street protests. Iran shut down the internet entirely during civil unrest. Each model carries enormous costs. Cuba's model, minimal access, maximum surveillance, selective disruption, is the most economical version. It is also the most fragile because it depends on keeping 11 million people isolated in a world where the rest of humanity is connected. And fragile systems don't fail gradually. They hold and hold and hold, and then they break all at once at exactly the moment they are tested most. What we know is this. Cuba's government rejected offers that would have given every citizen free internet access. They chose control over connectivity because unmonitored information threatens the story that keeps the system alive. Cubans responded by building SNET, 10,000 users connected through cables strung between apartment windows. The government absorbed it and placed it under state supervision. Targeted internet shutdowns during protests became routine after 2021. The regime needs digital connectivity for economic survival, while fearing it for political survival. The underground network, the USB drives, the VPNs, the encrypted messages, has not disappeared. It has evolved. What we don't know is how long a government maintains legitimacy when its citizens must build illegal networks to access what the rest of the world takes for granted. We don't know whether the next protest wave reaches critical mass before the signal can be cut. And we don't know whether the regime's deepest vulnerability isn't the blockade, isn't the sanctions, isn't any military pressure, but a 20-year-old in Havana with an Ethernet cable and a reason to connect. Every external pressure Washington applied targeted what Cuba imports. This one targets what Cuba cannot afford to let in. The truth. The blockade cuts fuel. Information cuts something the regime cannot replace. It cuts the story. And a government that loses control of the story loses control of everything. So here is the question that no analyst has answered cleanly. Is internet access a human right or a strategic weapon? Because if it's a right, Cuba's refusal is authoritarian oppression. If it's a weapon, Cuba's refusal is rational self-defense. The people building underground networks believe it is a right. The government dismantling those networks believes it is a weapon. Both are correct. And that tension, that unresolved, uncomfortable tension, is exactly why this crisis isn't ending. Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this connected something for you that the daily headlines keep missing, hit like. It's the only signal the algorithm reads to decide whether this reaches 11 people or 11,000. Share this with anyone who still thinks Cuba's crisis is only about oil and sanctions. It is also about cables strung between apartment windows and USB drives passed hand to hand in the dark. We cover this story every day because it matters every day. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe and stay ahead of what's actually happening.